As we drew near the shore, we were surprised to see a number of little figures ranged in a row along the water's edge, and apparently gazing fixedly at us. They seemed to wear dark coats and white waistcoats, and stood quite still with their arms dropping by the side. Only every now and then would one extend gently, as though longing to embrace us. Ah, here at last come the pygmy inhabitants of this country to welcome us, cried I, laughing. Oh, father, exclaimed Jack, I hope they are Lilliputians. I once read in a book about them. So there must be such people, you know, only these look rather too large. You must be content to give up the Lilliputians and accept penguins, my dear Jack, said I. We have not before seen them in such numbers, but Ernest knocked one down, if you remember, soon after we landed. They are excellent swimmers, but helpless on land, as they can neither fly nor run. We were gradually approaching the land as I spoke, and no sooner was the water shallow than out sprang Jack from his tub, and wading ashore took the unsuspecting birds by surprise, and with his stick laid half a dozen, right and left, either stunned or dead at his feet. Then the rest escaped into the water, dived, and disappeared. As these penguins are disagreeable food on account of their strong oily taste, I was sorry Jack had attacked them, but going to examine them when we landed, some of the fallen arose from their swoon and began solemnly to waddle away, upon which we caught them and tying their feet together with long grass, laid them on the sand to wait until we were ready to start. The 3 wheelbarrows then each received a load. The live penguins, seated gravely, were trundled along by Jack, and away we went at a great rate. The unusual noise of our approach set the dogs barking furiously, but discovering us, they rushed forward with such forcible demonstrations of delight that poor little Jack, who, as it was, could scarcely manage his barrow, was fairly upset, penguins and all. This was too much for his patience, and it was absurd to see how he started up, cuffed them soundly from their boisterous behavior. This scene and the examination of our burdens caused great merriment, the tobacco grater and the iron plates evidently puzzling everyone. I sent the boys to catch some of our geese and ducks, and bid them fasten a penguin to each by the leg, thinking that it was worth while to try to tame them. My wife had exerted herself in our absence to provide a good store of potatoes and also of manioc root. I admired her industry, and little Fran said, Oh, father, I wonder what you will say when mother and I give you some Indian corn, and melons, and pumpkins, and cucumbers. Now, you little chatterbox, cried she, you have let out my secret. I was going to have the pleasure of surprising your father when my plants were growing up. Ah, the poor disappointed little mother, said I. Never mind, I am charmed to hear about it. Only do tell me, where did those seeds come from? Out of my magic bag, of course, replied she. And each time I have gone for potatoes, I have sown seeds in the ground, which was dug up to get them, and I have planted potatoes also. Well done, you wise little woman, I exclaimed. Why, you are a model of prudence and industry. But, continued she, I do not half like the appearance of those tobacco graters you have brought. It is possible you are going to make snuff? Do pray let us make sure an abundance of food for our mouths before we think of our noses. Make your mind easy, my wife. I have not the remotest intention of introducing that dirty, ridiculous habit of snuffing into your family. Please to treat my graters with respect. However, because they are to be the means of providing you with the first fresh bread you have seen this many a long day. What possible connection can there be between bread and a tobacco grater? I cannot imagine what you mean. And to talk of bread where there are no ovens is only tantalizing. Ah, you must not expect real loaves, said I, but on these flat iron plates I can bake flat cakes or scones, which will be excellent bread. I mean to try at once what I can do with Ernest's roots, and first of all, I want you to make me a nice strong canvas bag. This my wife willingly undertook to do, but she evidently had not much faith in my powers as a baker, and I saw her set on a good potful of potatoes before beginning to work, as though to make sure of a meal without depending on my bread. Spreading a large sailcloth on the ground, I summoned my boys, set to work. Each took a grater and a supply of well-washed manioc root, and when all was seated round the cloth, once, twice, thrice, off, cried I, beginning to rub the root as hard as I could against the rough surface of my grater. My example was instantly followed by the whole party, amid bursts of merriment as we each remarked the funny attitude and odd gestures of his neighbors while vehemently rubbing, rasping, grating, and grinding down the root allotted to him. No one was tempted by the look of the flour to stop and taste it, for in truth it looked much like wet sawdust. Cassava bread is highly esteemed in many parts of the New World, and I have even heard that some Europeans there prefer it to the wheaten bread of their own country. There are various species of manioc. One sort grows quickly and its roots ripen in a very short time. Another kind is somewhat slower growth. The roots of the third kind do not come to maturity for 2 years. The two first are poisonous if eaten raw, yet they are preferred to the last, which is harmless because they are so much more fruitful, and the flour produced is excellent, if the scrapings are carefully pressed. What is the good of pressing them, father? Inquired Ernest. It is in order to express the sap, which contains the poison. The dry pith is wholesome and nourishing. Still, I do not mean to taste my cakes until I have tried their effects on our fowls and the ape. By this time, our supply of roots being reduced to damp powder, the canvas bag was filled with it, and tying it tightly up, I attempted to squeeze it, but soon found that mechanical aid was necessary in order to express the moisture. My arrangements for this purpose were as follows. A strong, straight beam was made flat on one side, smooth planks were laid across to the lower roots of our tree. On these we placed the sack, above the sack another plank, and over that the long beam. One end was passed under a root near the sack, and the other projected far forward, and to that we attached all the heaviest weights we could think of, such as an anvil, iron bars, and masses of lead. The consequent pressure on the bag was enormous, and the sap flowed from it to the ground. Will this stuff keep any time? Inquired my wife, who came to see how we were getting on. Or must all this great bagful be used at once? In that case, we shall have to spend the whole of tomorrow in baking cakes. Not at all, I replied. Once dry, the flour in barrels will keep fresh a long time. We shall use a great deal of this, however, as you shall see. Do you think we might begin now, father? Said Fritz. There does not seem the least moisture remaining. Certainly, said I, but I shall only make one cake today for an experiment. We must see how it agrees with Master Nips and the hens before we set up a bakehouse in regular style. I took out a couple of handfuls of flour for this purpose, and with a stick loosened and stirred the remainder, which I intended should again be pressed. While an iron plate placed over a good fire was getting hot, I mixed the meal with water and a little salt, kneaded it well, and forming a thick cake, laid it on the hot plate when, one side presently becoming a nice yellow-brown color, it was turned and was quickly baked. It smelt so delicious that the boys quite envied the two hens and the monkey, who were selected as the subjects of this interesting experiment, and they silently watched them gobbling up the bits of cake I gave them, until Fritz turned to me, saying, Suppose the cake is poisonous, what effect will it have on the creatures? Will they be stupefied, or will they suffer in pain? That depends on the nature of the poison. Some causes violent pain, such as coliquum, hellebore, and aconite. Others produce stupefaction and paralysis, as opium, hemlock, and prussic acid. while others again, as strychnine, are followed by violent convulsions, or as belladonna, by delirium. The effects, of course, vary according to the quantity taken, and such remedies should be applied as well best counteract the effect of each poison. Emetics, in any case, to remove as much as possible of the noxious substance, combined with oils and mucineginous drinks to soothe and protect the stomach in the case of irritants. Stimulants such as spirits, ammonia, or strong coffee to rouse from the stupor of the narcotics. And sedative drugs, which are perhaps in themselves poisons, to counteract the overstimulation of the nerves caused by the convulsant poisons. But now let us think no more of poisons. Here is supper ready, and we need not be afraid to eat roast penguin and potatoes. No sooner said than done. We left the fowls, picking up the last crumbs they could find on the questionable food, and assembled to enjoy our evening meal of roast penguin. The potatoes were as usual excellent, and penguin really not so bad as I expected, although fishy in taste and very tough. Next morning, everyone expressed the tenderest concern as to the health of Nips and the hens, and lively pleasure was in every countenance when Jack, who ran first to make the visit of inquiry, brought news of their perfect good health and spirits. No time was now to be lost, and bread-making commenced in earnest. A large fire was kindled, and plates heated. The meal made into cakes, each of the boys busily preparing his own, and watching the baking most eagerly. Mistakes occurred, of course. Some of the bread was burnt, some not done enough, but a pile of nice tempting cakes was at length ready, and with plenty of good milk we breakfasted right royally, and in high spirits at our success. Soon after, whilst feeding the poultry with the fragments of the repast, I observed that the captive penguins were quite at ease among them, and as tame as the geese and the ducks. Their bonds were therefore loosened, and they were left as free as the other fowls. Having now discovered how to provide bread for my family, my thoughts began to revert to the wreck and all the valuables yet contained within it. Above all, I was bent on acquiring possession of the beautiful pinnace, and aware that our united efforts would be required to do the necessary work. I began to coax and persuade my wife to let me go in force with all the boys except Franz. She very unwillingly gave her consent at last, but not until I had faithfully promised never to pass a night on board. I did so with reluctance, and we parted, neither feeling quite satisfied with the arrangement. The boys were delighted to go in so large a party, and merrily carried provision bags filled with cassava bread and potatoes. Reaching Safety Bay without adventure, we first paid a visit to the geese and the ducks which inhabited the marsh there, and having fed them and seen that they were thriving well, we buckled on each other's cork belt, stepped onto the tugboat, and with the raft in tow, steered straight for the wreck. When we got on board, I desired the boys to collect whatever came first to hand, and load the raft to be ready for our return at night. And then we made a minute inspection of the pinnace. I came to the conclusion that difficulties well nigh insuperable lay between me and the safe possession of the beautiful little vessel. She lay in the most unget-outable position at the further end of the hold, stowed in so confined a narrow space that it was impossible to think of fitting the parts together there. At the same time, these parts were so heavy that removing them to a convenient place piece by piece was equally out of the question. I sent the boys away to amuse themselves by rummaging out anything that they liked to carry away, and sat down quietly to consider the matter. As my eyes began used to the dim light which entered the compartment through a chink or crevice here and there, I perceived how carefully every part of the pinnace was arranged and marked with numbers, so that if only I could bestow sufficient time on the work and contrive space in which to execute it, I might reasonably hope for success. Room! Room to work in, boys. That's what we need in the first place, I cried, as my sons came to see my plan I had devised, for so great was their reliance on me that they never doubted the penance was to be ours. Fetch axes and let us break down the compartment and clear space all around. To work we all went, yet evening drew near, and but little impression was made on the mass of woodwork around us. We had to acknowledge the immense amount of labor and perseverance would be required before we all called ourselves the owners of the useful and elegant little craft, which lay within this vast hulk like a fossil shell embedded in a rock. Preparations for returning to shore were hastily made, and we landed without much relish for the long walk to Falconhurst, when to our great surprise and pleasure we found my wife and little Franz at Tentholm awaiting us. She had resolved to take up her quarters there during the time we should be engaged on the wreck. In that way you will live near your work, and I shall not quite lose sight of you, said she, with a pleasant smile. You are a good, sensible, kind wife, I exclaimed, delighted with her plan, and we shall work with the greater diligence, that you may return as soon as possible to your dear Falconhurst. Come and see what we have brought you, mother, cried Fritz, a good addition to your stores, is it not? And he and his brothers exhibited 2 small casks of butter, 3 of flour, corn, rice, and many other articles welcome to our careful housewife. Our days were now spent in hard work on board, first cutting and clearing an open space around the pinnace, and then putting the parts together. We started early and returned at night, bringing each time a valuable freight from our old vessel. At length, with incredible labor, all was completed. The pinnace stood actually ready to be launched, but imprisoned within massive wooden walls which defied our strength. It seemed exactly as though the graceful vessel had awakened from sleep and was longing to spring into the free blue sea and spread her wings to the breeze. I could not bear to think that our success so far should be followed by failure and disappointment. Yet no possible means of setting her free could I conceive, and I was almost in despair, when an idea occurred to me which, if I could carry it out, would effect her release without further labor or delay. Without explaining my purpose, I got a large cast-iron mortar, filled it with gunpowder, and secured a block of oak to the top, through which I pierced a hole for the insertion of a match, and this great petard I so placed, that when it exploded, it should blow out the side of the vessel next to which the pinnace lay. Then securing it with chains, that the recoil might do no damage, I told the boys I was going ashore earlier than usual, and calmly desired them to get into the boat. Then lighting a match I had prepared, and which would burn some time before reaching the powder, I hastened after them with a pounding heart, and we made for land. We brought the raft close inshore and began to unload it, and the other boat I did not haul up, but kept her ready to put off at a moment's notice. My anxiety was unobserved by anyone, as I listened with strained nerves for the expected sound. It came, a flash, a mighty roar, a grand burst of smoke. My wife and children, terror-stricken, turned their eyes towards the sea, whence the startling noise came, and then in fear and wonder looked at me for some explanation. Perhaps, said my wife, as I did not speak, perhaps you have left a light burning near some of the gunpowder, and an explosion has taken place. Not at all unlikely, replied I quietly. We had a fire below when we were caulking some seams in the pinnace. I shall go off at once and see what has happened. Will anyone come? The boys needed no second invitation, but sprang into the boat, while I lingered to reassure my wife by whispering a few words of explanation, and then joining them, we pulled for the wreck at a more rapid rate than we ever had done before. No alteration had taken place in the side at which we usually boarded her, and we pulled around to the further side, where a marvelous sight awaited us. A huge rent appeared. The decks and bulwarks were torn open, and water was covering with floating wreckage. all seemed in ruins, and the compartment where the pennants rested was fully revealed to view. There sat the little beauty, to all appearance uninjured, and the boys, whose attention was taken up with the melancholy scene of ruin and confusion around them, were astonished to hear me shout in enthusiastic delight, "Hooray! She is ours! The lovely Penance is won! We shall be able to launch her easily after all. Come, boys, let us see if she has suffered from the explosion which has set her free." The boys gazed at me for a moment, and then, guessing my secret, "You planned it yourself, you clever, cunning father." "Oh, that machine we helped to make was on purpose to blow it up," cried they, and eagerly they followed me into the shattered opening, where to my intense satisfaction I found everything as I could wish, and the captive in no way suffered from the violent measures I had adopted for her deliverance. The boys were deeply interested in examining the effects of the explosion, and in the explanation I gave them of the principle and the proper way to manage a petard. It was evident that the launch could not be effected without much trouble. I had been careful to place rollers beneath the keel, so that by means of levers and pulleys we might, with our united strength, move her forward towards the water. A rope was attached by which to regulate the speed of the descent, and then, all hands putting their shoulders to the work, the Penance began to slide from the stocks, and finally slipped gently and steadily into the water, where she floated as if conscious it was her native element, while we, wild with excitement, cheered and waved enthusiastically. We then only remained long enough to secure our prize carefully at the most sheltered point. We went back to Tentholm, where we accounted for the explosion, saying that having blown away one side of the ship, we should be able to obtain the rest of its contents with very few more days' work. These days were devoted to completing the rigging, the mounting of her 2 little brass guns, and all necessary arrangements about the Penance, and it was wonderful what martial ardor was awakened by the possession of a vessel armed with 2 real guns. The boys chattered incessantly about savages, fleets of canoes, attacks, defense, and final annihilation of the invaders. I assured them that, brilliant as their victories would doubtless be, we should have good cause to thank God if their fighting powers and newborn valor were never put to the test. The Pinnacle was fully equipped and ready to sail, yet while no idea of the surprises we were preparing for her had dawned upon my wife and I, permitted the boys, who had kept the secret so well, to fire a salute when we entered the bay. Casting off from the ship and spreading the sail, our voyage began. The Penance glided swiftly through the water. I stood at the helm, Ernest and Jack manned the guns, and Fritz gave the word of command. "Fire!" Bang! Bang! Rattled out a thrilling report, while echoed and re-echoed among the cliffs, followed by shouts and hurrahs. My wife and her little boy rushed hastily forward from near the tent, and we could plainly see their alarm and astonishment. But speedily recognizing us, they waved joyfully and came quickly to the landing place to meet us. By skillful management, we brought the Pinnacle near the projection of the bank, and Fritz assisted his mother to come on board, where, breathless with haste and excitement, she exclaimed, "You dear, horrible, wonderful people! Shall I scold you or praise you? You have frightened me out of my wits. To see a beautiful little ship come sailing in was startlingly enough, for I could not conceive who might be on board. But the report of your guns made me tremble with fear, and I had not recognized your voices directly after. I should have run away with Franz, heaven knows where. But have you really done all this work yourselves?" she continued, when we had been forgiven for terrifying her with our vain-glorious salute. "What a charming little yacht! I should not be afraid to sail in this myself." After the Penance had been shown off and received the admiration she deserved, while our industry, skill, and perseverance met with boundless praise, "Now," said my wife, "you must come with me, and see how little Franz and I improved our time every day of your absence." We all landed and, with great curiosity, followed my wife up the river towards the cascade, where, to our astonishment, we found a garden neatly laid out in beds and walks. As she continued, "We don't frighten people by firing salutes in honor of our performances, though, although, by and by, I too shall want fire in my peaceable form. Look at my beds of lettuce and cabbage, my rows of beans and peas. Think what delicious dinners I shall be able to cook for you, and give my credit for my diligence." "My dear wife," I exclaimed, "this is beautiful. You have done wonders. Did you not find the work too hard?" "The ground is light and easy to dig hereabouts," she replied. "I have planted potatoes, cassava roots. There is space for your sugar canes and the young fruit trees, and I shall want you to contrive to irrigate them by leading water from the cascades and the hollow bamboos up by the sheltering rocks. I mean to have the pineapples and the melons. They will look splendid when they spread there. To shelter the beds of European vegetables from the heat of the sun, I have planted seeds of maize round them. The shadow of the tall plants will afford protection from the burning rays. Do you think that is a good plan?" "I do indeed. The whole arrangement is capital. Now, as sunset approaches, we must return to the tent for supper and rest, for both which we are all quite ready." The time passed in happy talk over a many new interests. Everyone had the pleasant sensation which attends successful labor, as well as experiencing the joy of affording unexpected pleasure to others. And I especially pointed out to my sons how true, genuine happiness consists in that, rather than in mere self-gratification. Next morning my wife said, If you can exist on shore long enough to visit Falconhurst, dear husband, I shall like you to attend to the little fruit trees. I fear they have been too much neglected. I have watered them occasionally and spread earth over the roots as they lay, but I could not manage to plant them." You have done far more than I could have expected, my wife," I replied, "and provided you do not ask me to give up on the sea altogether, I most willingly agree to your request, and will go to Falconhurst as soon as the raft is unloaded, and everything safely arranged here." Life on shore was an agreeable change for us all, and the boys went actively to work, so that the stores were quickly brought up to the tent, piled in order and carefully covered with sailcloth. Fastened down by pegs all around, the pinnace, being provided with an anchor, was properly moored, and her elegant appearance quite altered the look of our harbor, hitherto occupied only by the grotesque tub-boat and flat, uninteresting raft. Taking our ample supply of everything we should require at Falconhurst, we were soon comfortably re-established in that charming abode, its peaceful shade seeming more delightful than ever, after the heat and hard work we had lately undergone. Several Sundays had passed during our stay at Tenholm, and the welcome day of rest now returned again, to be observed with heartfelt devotion and grateful praise. I did not attempt too much in the form of preaching, as I could not have secured the attention of my hearers to any long-winded discourses, but they were interested in the Bible reading and simple instructions I drew from it, and their young voices joined sweetly in favored hymns which my wife sang from memory. In the evening I desired my boys to let me see their dexterity in athletic exercise, such as running, leaping, wrestling, and climbing, telling them that they must keep up the practice of these things as to grow into strong, active men, powerful to repel and cope with danger, as well as agile and swift-footed to escape from it. No man can really be courageous and self-reliant without an inward consciousness of physical power and capability. "I want to see my son strong, both morally and physically," said I. "That means, little friends," as the large blue eyes looked inquiringly up at me, "brave to do what is good and right, and to hate evil, and strong to work, hunt, provide for themselves and to others, and to fight if necessary." On the following day, the boys seeming disposed to carry out my wishes by muscular exercise of all sorts, I encouraged them by saying I meant to prepare a curious new weapon for them, only they must promise not to neglect the practice of archery, As to their guns, I had no reason to fear that they would be laid aside. Taking a long cord, I attached a laden bullet to each end, and had instantly to answer a storm of questions as to what this could possibly be for. "This is a miniature lasso," I said. "The Mexicans, Patagonians, and various tribes of South America make use of this weapon in hunting with marvelous dexterity. Only having no bullets, they fasten stones to their ropes, which are immensely longer than this. One end is swung around and around and mounted hunter's head, then cast with skill and precision towards the animal he wishes to strike. Immediately drawing its back, he can repeat this blow and either kill or wound his prey. Frequently, however, the intention is to take the animal, wild horse or buffalo, or whatever it may be, alive. In that case, the lasso is thrown while riding in hot pursuit, in such a way as to make the stone twist many times round the neck, body, or legs of the fugitive, arresting him even in full career." "Oh, father, what a splendid contrivance! Will you try it now? There's the donkey, father. Do catch the donkey." Not at all certain of my powers, I declined to practice upon a live subject, but consented to make a trial of skill by aiming at the stump of a tree at no great distance.